Welcome, and thank you for joining us. And Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. And you'll notice, example, that we are actually in Genesis on Noah, except the parsha for this week is Yitro, which is in Exodus and deals with the Ten Commandments. Well, we got through all the Rashis over the last few years. We managed to do all the verses and all the Rashis on Parshat Yitro. And on those rare occasions when that happens, what I do is I go back to Torah Temimah and we continue in order we're going through the Torah with Torah Temimah. And so this week, with God's help, we will do a few Torah Temimahs on Noach, and I hope you, of course, find them interesting and stimulating, and we learn a lot from it. We really do. So we're still on verse 23. There are a few citations from rabbinic literature, rabbinic sources that Torah Temimah is going to quote and also comment on. And this is this verse. It's on this verse in Parshat Noah 23, where it says all of existence was wiped out, which was on the surface of the earth, from human beings to cattle to reptiles, maybe up to the birds of the air, right, of the heavens. And then it goes to say they were wiped out from the entire earth, and only Noah and who was with him in the ark remained. What we're looking now is the order of what specified. And I'm going to ask you please to mute if you haven't, only because, again, I'm getting a lot of ambient sound going on. Thank you. And if you have a question, please unmute and ask the question. So, Me'adam ad Behema. So yesterday, of course, we talked about the portion of the world to come, all right? But now we're going to deal with this order, Me'adam, from human beings to cattle to etc. to etc. Me'ikra Adam, to begin with human beings, v'hadar behema, and after that cattle. In other words, why do men come first, or why do human beings come first in this listing? Melamed, so it's to teach us Adam kodim lepuraniut, that human beings are going to be first in terms of retribution. They're going to be the first to get the consequences of whatever wickedness exists in the world. So let's take a look. And this is from Tractate Brachot. And we're down here. Lo nitba'er kan tam hadavar. But in this particular statement, we aren't given the reason why human beings should be the first to be punished, right? Aval inyan zeh, he says, but in fact, this whole issue, Baba Mechilta, it is mentioned in this midrash called the Mechilta. It's a midrash, a halachic midrash on the book of Exodus. And let's keep going. Here we go. Parshat Bo. Mechilta is organized according to the parshiot, according to the weekly Torah portions in the book of Exodus. So Parsha Bo, right, it's where the plagues are mentioned, and it's chapter 12 of Exodus, verse 12, where it says, V'hikiti kol bechor, I shall smite all the firstborn, Adam, and look at this, here's the listing, Adam va'ad behema, from human beings to cattle, etc. Me'ikara Adam, he's quoting the Mechilta here. He says to begin with human beings, v'achar kach behema, and afterwards the cattle. Men come first, human beings come first. And it goes on, the Mechilta goes on to say, Mi shehitchil ba'aveira, the one who started the transgression. Tchila mimenu, tchila, right? The one who did the transgression to begin with. Mimenu hitchila hapuranot. So from him began the punishment. Ye'uyan Sham, he says, check it out, check out the Mechilta. Ukiyeseh bazeh, he says in a similar way. Matzina, we find, befaro, with regards to Pharaoh, dichtiv, where it says, Uvacha. Okay, so specifically, God says, Uvacha, and with you, Pharaoh, Uva Amcha, and with your people, etc. Ya'alu Hatzfardaim, the frogs will come up, right? Notice who comes first? Pharaoh. V'chein katuv b'parshat Ir Hanidachat. And likewise, in the chapter that deals with the city that is doomed, right, the city that's going to get wiped out, it's mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy, this law about this city, this that is following idolatry and wickedness, and it talks about destroying that city. Uh, a very, let's say this is a difficult chapter dealing with it. Okay. Hakeh takeh, you shall surely smite it, Adam v'ad behema, from human beings to cattle. Excuse me 1 second. Okay. But he says more. So now we understand the reason why human beings are listed first in that listing, in that verse, is because they were the ones who began the problem, right? They began the ones to rebel against God. So they get the punishment first. This isn't all we're going to deal with. There's still going to be one other. When we're done with this one, this verse, this citation, we will be dealing with the last one. I'll just tell you, don't mean to be a spoiler alerter, but is what did the animals do that was wrong with Noah, etc. So, okay. Anyway, we'll see. Ach tziyun, tzarich iyun. But wait a second, he says, we need to look further into this. We need to look into this more deeply. Dahala el kativ, because in a previous verse it's written, and this is Pasuk Kaf Aleph, that if you check out verse 21 of this particular chapter in Noah, right? Or, let's see, right? It says, Vayigva kol basar, it says, all flesh perished, etc. Uvabhema, and it goes on to list amongst the cattle, uvachaya, and with the beasts, the gomer, etc., the chol adam, kol adam. And then it ends with, and all the human beings. Their human beings come last. Hare dichtiv adam lebasof. That's exactly what this is. In other words, here, in fact, human beings are mentioned at the end. Umay uma pasuk ze mehahu. Right? So the question is, why? What's the difference? But in this verse, in other words, why is it preferable to mention human beings lost in this verse than all the others? V'yesh lomar, and one could say, al pi mashakatuv b'Baba Kama, regarding, with reference to what is written in the tractate Baba Kama, Bebe means page 2, the B side of the page. Adam, when it comes to human beings, the itle mazla, because human beings have a guardian angel. A guardian angel, that's interesting, right? That there is a tradition within Jewish tradition that every one of us has a guardian angel that helps us, basically, right? Upiresh Rashi, and there Rashi explains, Sheyesh lo da'at. Rashi doesn't, it sounds here as if Rashi's going in a little bit of a different direction. He is not translating this as guardian angel per se, but saying yesh lo da'at, that human beings have intelligence. Lishmor et atzmor, a human being has the intelligence to guard himself, right? Veheve hezeko kasher. So it means that it's more difficult to injure a human being, mehezek she'ar ba'alei chai, than trying to injure other animals, other creatures. So if you want to understand Masla on a more spiritual, mystical basis, you can understand it as a guardian angel that also means is protecting us, right? That's the whole point, guardian angel. Or you can simply say that it's human intelligence, that human intelligence, we humans have that intelligence. Ulefize, and for this reason, Pasuk Vayigva, that verse that talks about perishing, right? The Ire B'Sha'at Hatvi'ah, that is talking actually about the moment when the inhabitants of the world were drowning, okay, the actual drowning. B'vadai nitba'u habehemot v'chayot kodem. It's simply mentioning the order in which it happened. In other words, because human beings are able to withstand this kind of stuff more than animals, that's saying the animals died first. That's all it's saying. Okay, kodem ha'adam, before human beings. Mipnei she'ein bahem, because the animals do not have da'at lehishtadel lehizdarez. They don't have the understanding, right, the level of intelligence to struggle, and they struggle, but not in the sense here, right? In other words, human beings have this higher level of able to avoid or try to prevent destruction, ulehizdares, or to be alert, behatzala, regarding saving. In other words, look, we know when there are floods, there are people who are come out in boats and helicopters and other kinds of things and try to help other people get saved, right? Doesn't happen. Animals aren't capable of doing that, right? Kamohadam, like human beings. Masha'enoch ein hapasuk, but that isn't this verse that we actually just read, the one that we're on. Dahacha ire, because in this case it's dealing with bepu'ula mitzad hakadosh baruch hu. It's talking about what God was doing. K'tiv Adam mikodem. And because we're talking about the divine retribution going on here, human beings are mentioned first, kedemifaresh, as is explained, mipnei she'adam kodem lepur aniyot, because human beings have to come first when it comes to the punishment, the retribution going on. The dok, meaning he's comfortable, he's saying QED. All right? So let's take a look. One more, right? Adam in this verse. Adam ad behema. From human beings to cattle, right? Domestic animals. Adam chata. Okay, so if human beings sinned, behema ma chata. What sin did the cattle do? What sin did they perform? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what the Holy One, blessed be He, had in mind. Klum barati behema v'chaya ela bishvil ha'adam. So this is a principle, biblical principle, and a rabbinic interpretation of this biblical principle, that the reason for the creation of cattle and creatures, wild creatures, was for the sake of human beings. And we've talked about that a little bit before, okay? To understand that the real implication here is that if in fact nature is there to serve human beings, it isn't saying that human beings now have a right to pillage nature. It's saying that we have more responsibility to act as stewards, as human beings, in recognition that nature is there to support human life. That's the point here. Achshav, and now since she'adam choteh, so now since human beings have sinned, in other words, they have basically nixed on their right to exist, behema v'chaya lamali. What do I need? Cattle and the creatures. I don't need them. We don't need to have them around because the purpose of their creation was for human beings. And that's why they perished in the flood. Because from this sort of global way or universalist way of looking at it, there was no longer a need for them because they were initially created as we say elsewhere, that God basically made a prepared table for human beings using a metaphor of a banquet. Okay. Let's see what he has to say here. So here we go. Lichura, he says, on the surface, tzarich iyun. We're gonna look more deeply into this. Why? Behash'ela behema machata. In the very question that we're asking, in saying that cattle, what was the sin that the cattle committed that they needed to perish? Hamavu'ar besugya kan. It's mentioned explicitly in this particular Talmudic discussion, degam habehemot v'hachayot hishchitu darkam. It's saying that, in fact, that the cattle and the other creatures, in fact, perverted their way, right? They also acted perversely. Shenizkaku min l'she'eno mino. We read this, right? They coupled up, one species coupled up with another species, a different species. So now we seem to have a contradiction to this very question, right? So it would appear to be that we can explain this al pi diuk lashon haGemara, that if we look at the actual language of the Gemara, of the Talmud here, and look at it carefully, be'inyan zeh, regarding this matter, ki hishchit kol basar. It says, okay, looking at what was said here, for all flesh perverted its way, right? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan, Melamed, what this teaches, Shehirbiu behema al chaya, that basically what we're saying is that human beings caused cattle to mate with wild animals, the chaya al behema, and again, human beings caused wild animals, creatures, to mate with bahama, with domesticated animals. V'hakol al adam, right? So it turns out that human beings are ultimately responsible for the degree to which the cattle and the other creatures were perverting their ways. Adam al hakol, right? Hakol hal Adam va'Adam al Hakol. That human beings were responsible for everything and honestly in every sense. Halashan shehirbiu, right? A causative form of the verb. In other words, this expression that they caused to mate, more meforash. This teaches, it indicates explicitly, shaha'anashim garmu, that human beings caused this situation, vehichrichu utam lazeh, and they forced the animals to do what they did. Uchagon al yedei knisa ladir uchuduma. So, in other words, they did it by taking them into the corral, right, etc. Similarly. And he says, Iyen Baba Metzia, he says there's a reference, Talmudic reference, Baba Metzia, page 91a. Aval lo shel haba'emot v'chayot miratzon atzmam nizdaku lazeh. We cannot say that the cattle and the wild animals themselves desired to couple in this way. They had no desire to do this. Ulefize, and if we understand it this way, necha hakushia. Now the question works, right? The question is legitimate. Behema ma chata. In what sense did the cattle sin? Ki afal pishin nizdakaku l'she'inan minan, because despite the fact that they coupled with species that were not their own, aval lo mirtzonam let's see, hachofshi. They didn't do it out of their free will. Ki im betachbulot ha'adam, but through the plannings and the plottings of human beings, the dog. And now we can answer the question. Now, what's interesting is that there is a law mentioned later on that if a man mates with an animal, or if an animal mates with a woman, not only is it a capital offense, but the animal also is killed. And of course, the question is, well, but here we just read, animals don't act in the same way. They don't have free will in that way. Why is the animal killed? Bart, yes, I'll stop. Bart, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I put my question in chat.
Okay.
What
Yeah,
about
go
fish?
ahead. Can you just tell me?
Yeah, I just did. What about fish?
Okay. So we said elsewhere that the fish were not killed
Okay.
because they are not mentioned in this. That there's a passage we read that talked about the fact that the fish were not killed. Now, there are difficulties there too, but I think, Torah Temimah deals with it as to whether the waters were boiling or not. All right? But he brings it up. But as I recollect his answer, he basically says that the reason why some species survived and say the fit and others didn't had all to do with divine will. It had to do, or can we say divine providence, that they survived, and not necessarily having to do with what we'd normally call natural causes. So to go back to the issue that I was dealing with, the question is asked, what did the animal do in this case that I was mentioning to deserve to be killed? And again, the answer given is that if this animal is seen by other people, they're going to say, "Oh, that's the animal that mated with so and so." And in order not to add humiliation to the fact that this person has now paid with their lives, okay, if they're found guilty, we destroy the animal as well. And this is also based on the basic principle that that nature is there for us. And again, I believe it really is to say how responsible we are for what's going on around us in the natural world. And we will stop here for today with the discussion here. So while we are still on recording, are there any comments that you want to make regarding what we studied today before I stop the recording? No? Okay. All right. I'm going to stop it then.